There is a desert in northern China. For thousands of years, nothing lived there. No crops, no cities, just scorching sand, burning dunes, and silence. Even today, if you pulled up a satellite image from 2015, you would see nothing but brown and beige stretching across 46,000 hectares, roughly twice the size of Manhattan. Now pull up the same coordinates in 2026. What you are looking at is not a city, it is not a forest, it is something that the BBC called one of the most stunning transformations of any landscape on Earth. The entire desert section, all 460 square kilometers of it, has been covered in solar panels, hundreds of thousands of them, absorbing the same sunlight this desert has been reflecting, uselessly, for millennia. And here is the part that should stop you cold. If you zoom out just enough on that satellite image, if you look at the shape of those panels from altitude, you will see that the Chinese engineers did not just build a solar farm. They built a horse. An enormous horse, visible from space, made entirely of solar panels, a message, a signal to anyone watching from above that China is not just catching up in clean energy. China has already won. And most Americans have absolutely no idea. And today we are going to walk through one of the most consequential stories of the 21st century, a story that will directly affect your energy bills, your country's global influence, the jobs in your community, and whether the United States remains the world's dominant superpower by the time your kids are adults. We are going to talk about how China went from producing essentially zero solar energy 15 years ago, to installing more solar panels and wind turbines in a single year than every other country on Earth combined. We are going to talk about why Washington let it happen. And we are going to talk about what comes next, because the next chapter of this story is the one that matters most for America. Let's go. To understand how dramatic this transformation is, you need to see the numbers side by side. The year is 2010. China is already the world's second largest economy. It is already the world's largest manufacturer. It is building a new skyscraper somewhere every 72 hours. Its factories are consuming more electricity than the entire continent of Europe. And its solar energy capacity, total, nationwide, is roughly 1/10 of 1 gigawatt. That is not a typo. 1/10 of 1 gigawatt. To put that in terms that means something. That is enough electricity to power approximately 100,000 homes. Not 100 million, 100,000 in a country of 1.4 billion people at that moment. China was producing less solar electricity than Germany, less than Spain, less than Italy, less than Japan, less than the United States. South Korea was the world's leading solar energy producer at the time, not China. Now jump to 2018, 8 years later, China had installed more than 7,000 large-scale solar power stations. Its total solar capacity had exploded from that tiny fraction of a gigawatt to 111 gigawatts. That is enough electricity to power the entire United Kingdom. Every home, every hospital, every factory, every office, for 3 full days in 8 years. Starting from almost nothing. And then, if you thought that was fast, the next 8 years made the first 8 look slow. By 2026, China's installed solar capacity has reached 574 gigawatts. That is more than the entire electricity generating capacity of India, the world's most populous country, running for 2 full days from solar energy alone. One type of clean energy, in one country, and China is not slowing down. It is targeting 770 gigawatts of solar capacity, and here is the number that should genuinely unsettle every energy analyst in Washington. China is currently installing more than 100 solar panels every single second. Not per day, not per hour, every second, around the clock. 365 days a year. That is not a development story anymore. That is a takeover. Why China did this? Here is what most American media coverage gets wrong about China's clean energy rise. They frame it as an environmental story. China wanted to reduce pollution. China wanted to fight climate change. China signed the Paris Agreement. That is the version you hear on cable news. That is not the full story. The real driver was much colder, much more strategic, and much more threatening to American power. China has a new prime minister, a man named Wen Jiabao. Before he entered politics, Wen Jiabao was a geologist. He spent his academic career studying the Earth's resources, what was in the ground, where it was, who controlled it. And when he looked at China's energy situation in 2003, what he saw alarmed him. China was running on coal and imported oil. The coal was destroying the air in Chinese cities, killing tens of thousands of Chinese citizens every single year through respiratory disease and pollution. Related illness. The oil was coming primarily from the Middle East. And the Middle East, in 2003, was not exactly a model of stability. The United States had just invaded Iraq. The entire region was being reshaped by American military force, and every barrel of oil traveling from the Persian Gulf to Chinese refineries had to pass through shipping lanes that were, and this is the part that mattered most to Beijing, controlled by the United States Navy. Think about what that means for a moment. China's economy, the engine powering the rise of its entire civilization, was dependent on energy that came from a region destabilized by its primary rival, traveling through sea lanes controlled by that same rival. If Washington decided to turn the screws, it could. If a war broke out in the Strait of Hormuz, China's factories stopped. If America chose to pressure China economically, energy was the pressure point. Wen Jiabao looked at that situation and saw it for exactly what it was, a leash. And China decided it was going to cut that leash. The equation was simple. Energy is national security. Whoever controls their own energy supply cannot be strangled. And China was going to control its own energy supply if it was the last thing the Chinese Communist Party ever did. So Beijing did not just decide to build solar farms. It decided to dominate the entire clean energy supply chain, from the raw materials in the ground, to the factories that process them, to the panels and turbines that generate power, to the batteries that store at every single link in the chain under Chinese control. And then it wrote a blank check to make it happen. The blank check. Starting in 2006, China committed to spending more than $100 billion every single year on research and development. Not just in clean energy, across technology broadly, but clean energy was the crown jewel. That number kept climbing, year after year, until China's research and development spending reached a level that rivals the United States, historically the world's undisputed leader in innovation spending. On top of that baseline, the Chinese government poured hundreds of billions of dollars in direct subsidies into its solar, wind, and battery companies. It protected its domestic market from foreign competition so Chinese companies could grow to scale before facing international rivals. It locked up global supplies of the raw materials needed to build clean energy technology: cobalt, lithium, polysilicon, rare earth elements, giving Chinese manufacturers access to inputs that foreign competitors simply could not get at the same cost. And it used the cheap electricity from its own coal plants, the same plants that were poisoning its cities, to power aluminum smelters and polysilicon factories at a production cost lower than anywhere else on the planet. Brutal, methodical, effective. Between 4.5 and 5 million of those workers, more than 70% of the entire global solar energy workforce, are Chinese workers. Inside China, China did not just build an industry, it built a workforce that has no parallel anywhere on Earth. And the results speak for themselves. China today holds around 700,000 patents in clean energy technology. That is more than half of all clean energy patents registered globally. China holds the world's 10 largest solar power stations. It dominates more than 90% of global polysilicon production, the key ingredient in solar panels. It produces more solar panels than every other country on Earth combined. What America did instead. Now here is where this story becomes uncomfortable for an American audience, because while China was writing that blank check and executing that strategy with machine-like consistency, the United States was doing something very different. In 2005, a solar panel startup called Solyndra was founded in California. It had a genuinely innovative product and a real market opportunity. The federal government provided it with loan guarantees worth around $500 million to help it scale. By 2011, Solyndra had gone bankrupt, and the American political system, particularly the faction of it tied to fossil fuel interests, never let that story go. If the world transitions to clean energy, and physics, economics, and the trajectory of every major technology curve suggest it will, then the country that manufactures the solar panels, the wind turbines, and the batteries that power that world will hold the leverage that oil currently gives America. That country, right now, is China. That is the war that is being fought, not with missiles, not with troops, with factories and patents and supply chains and a workforce of 5 million solar energy workers. And it is a war that by any honest assessment of the current trajectory, America is losing. Is there still time? This is where I want to be fair to the American side of this story because it is not entirely a story of failure. The Inflation Reduction Act, passed in 2022, committed hundreds of billions of dollars to American clean energy manufacturing. New solar and battery factories are being built. There is a real effort, bipartisan in some corners of Congress, to rebuild what was lost. The United States still leads the world in energy technology research and in several advanced manufacturing sectors. But there is a gap in installed capacity, in supply chain control and workforce, in patent holdings, that took 20 years to open and will not close quickly. China, for its part, is not standing still. Its current solar production is actually larger than what its domestic market can consume right now, driving a significant price crash. The global economy is still heavily dependent on fossil fuels and nuclear power, and the political will in much of the world to transition away from oil and gas is inconsistent. But here is what the numbers say. China is installing capacity faster than any country in history has ever installed anything. It controls the materials, the manufacturing, and increasingly the financing for the clean energy systems the world will need. And it has made this a national priority, not a campaign talking point that reverses every 4 years, but a multi-decade strategic commitment backed by the full power of the Chinese state. The question for America is not whether this transition is happening. It is whether the United States will build the industrial capacity to compete in the world that is coming, or whether it will spend the next 20 years debating it while China builds it. That horse in the Mongolian desert is not just a solar farm. It is a statement. China looked at 46,000 hectares of useless, burning sand, and turned it into a power source. It looked at an entire global industry and decided to own it. It looked at the energy architecture of the 21st century and decided to design it. And it did all of this quietly, methodically, while most of the world was looking somewhere else. The question is, what does America do now? That is a question worth arguing about. That is a question that should be at the center of every serious policy conversation in Washington, because the answer to it will shape this country's place in the world for the next 50 years. If this video made you think, share it. The people in your life need to understand what is actually happening in this competition. Subscribe to Geopolitics Explained for more breakdowns of the stories that actually matter. And drop your answer in the comments. Do you think America still has what it takes to compete? Or has China already won this race? I'll see you in the next one.